When I say Viking, what springs to mind? Longships bristling with axes? Helmeted warriors descending on terrified monasteries? A relentless tide of bloodthirsty raiders from the frozen north? For centuries, this has been the dominant image, a fearsome, almost monolithic force of destruction. But what if I told you that this popular narrative, while containing slivers of truth, is largely incomplete? A sensationalized caricature that overshadows a far more complex, industrious, and frankly, surprising reality? Today, on Twistra, we're going to journey beyond the sagas of pillage and plunder to uncover the true face of the Viking Age. We're going to reveal how the people we call Vikings were, for the most part, not rampaging berserkers, but something far more foundational to civilization: ingenious farmers, shrewd global traders, and perhaps most astonishingly, a hidden network of secret explorers who reached the New World centuries before Columbus, and then, for reasons we're about to explore, kept it almost entirely under wraps. Let's start by dismantling the myth of the perpetually warring Viking. While raids certainly happened, they were the exception, not the rule, for the vast majority of people living in Scandinavia from the late 8th to the mid-11th century. These were agrarian societies. Their lives revolved around the rhythm of the seasons, the fertility of the soil, and the health of their livestock. The average Viking was a farmer. They cultivated barley, oats, and rye. They raised cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. Their days were filled with back-breaking labor, plowing, sowing, harvesting, mending fences, building homes. Survival depended on cooperation, not constant conflict. Their homes, the famous longhouses, were not just dwellings but often communal spaces for extended families, sheltering generations under one sod roof. Here, stories were told, laws were discussed, and children were raised to understand the intricate balance of their world. This was a society deeply rooted in family, community, and the land. Raids were often short-term expeditions, undertaken by a minority, often younger men seeking wealth or status, to supplement the agricultural economy, not replace it. So, if the image of the axe-wielding raider isn't the whole story, what was the driving force behind their extraordinary expansion? The answer lies not in mindless aggression, but in an equally powerful human impulse: commerce. Forget the plundering warrior for a moment, and instead, envision the Viking as an entrepreneur. Their longships, those magnificent feats of engineering, were not just vessels of war, but highly efficient cargo ships. The same shallow draft that allowed them to strike deep inland also made them perfect for navigating rivers and coastlines, transforming them into the undisputed masters of medieval trade routes. From the furs of the northern forests to the walrus ivory of the Arctic, from amber collected on Baltic shores to the iron forged in their own lands, the Vikings had goods to sell. And they were astonishingly good at finding markets. Their network stretched further than almost any other European civilization of their time. They sailed east, establishing trade hubs that would eventually evolve into major Russian cities like Kiev and Novgorod, linking Scandinavia to the riches of Byzantium and the Arab caliphates. Imagine a Viking merchant in Baghdad trading furs for silver dirhams, spices, and exotic silks. To the west, they traded with the British Isles, Francia, and beyond. They established settlements that became vital economic centers. They weren't just taking, they were exchanging. They brought back foreign coins, tools, ideas, and even religious influences. Christianity, for example, spread partly through these very trade routes, long before forced conversions. The Viking Age was, in many ways, an age of globalization, spearheaded by these pragmatic, seafaring merchants. Their wealth came not just from raiding, but from a sophisticated understanding of supply and demand. They were the ultimate middlemen, connecting disparate worlds. But here's where our story takes a truly unexpected turn, because while they were busy trading, a select few were embarking on voyages so daring, so revolutionary, that the full implications were kept hidden for centuries. The westward expansion of the Norse is well documented, the settlement of Iceland, then Greenland. These were harsh, demanding journeys, undertaken by hardy farmers seeking new land and opportunity. But their greatest journey, the one that rewrites the history books, was deliberately obscured. From Greenland, the sagas speak of a land further west, discovered by a man named Bjarni Herjolfsson, who was blown off course. Later, Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, intentionally set out to explore these new shores. He named them Helgeland, Flat Stone Land, Markland, Forest Land, and finally, Vinland, Wineland. For decades, historians debated, were these just myths? Fantastical tales? Then, in 1960, the definitive proof emerged. At a site called Elland's Auxiliary Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, archaeologists unearthed the unmistakable remains of a Norse settlement. Not just a temporary camp, but buildings, workshops, and artifacts that screamed Viking. This wasn't just a brief landing. The Norse built dwellings, worked iron, and attempted to establish a foothold. They spent years, perhaps even decades, exploring the North American coastline, interacting, and sometimes clashing, with the indigenous populations they called Skraelings. They brought back timber, furs, and perhaps even grapes, giving Vinland its name. So, the Vikings discovered America roughly 500 years before Columbus. This is a well-established historical fact. But here's the Twistra twist: why didn't the world know? Why wasn't this monumental achievement celebrated, recorded, and integrated into the broader historical narrative of European exploration? The answer is not a single, simple truth, but a fascinating confluence of factors that, together, led to perhaps history's greatest non-discovery. Firstly, the sheer logistics. The journey to Vinland was incredibly arduous and dangerous, even for the best Norse sailors. It was a long, perilous voyage across the North Atlantic, far from established trade routes. The resources required to maintain a permanent settlement were enormous. Secondly, the local inhabitants. The Skraelings, as the Norse called them, were not passive observers. They were resilient, numerous, and defended their lands. While some trade occurred, conflicts were common, making long-term settlement precarious and costly in lives. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, the economic viability. This is the core of the twist. What could Vinland offer that couldn't be obtained closer to home, or along existing, safer trade routes? Timber? Scandinavia and Russia had vast forests. Furs? The Arctic provided plenty. Grapes? A novelty, perhaps, but not a commodity that could justify such a monumental effort and expense. The Norse weren't driven by abstract ideals of discovery or empire building in the way later European powers would be. They were pragmatists. If a venture didn't make economic sense, if the risks outweighed the rewards, it was abandoned. Vinland, for all its wonder, simply wasn't profitable enough to sustain. So, the knowledge of Vinland became localized. It was shared within specific communities in Iceland and Greenland, recorded in sagas that were primarily oral traditions for centuries before being written down. It wasn't a state secret, but it also wasn't something broadly publicized across Europe because, frankly, who would have cared? The rest of Europe was largely unaware of Norse achievements even closer to home, let alone across a vast, terrifying ocean for seemingly limited returns. That secret wasn't a conspiracy. It was a matter of practical economics and geographic isolation. The Norse explorers of Vinland were not seeking to discover a new continent for glory, but simply to find new resources and opportunities, just like the farmers who tilled the soil and the traders who sailed to Byzantium. When those opportunities proved too difficult or unprofitable, they simply moved on. The Real Viking Age wasn't just a series of bloody raids. It was a dynamic era shaped by resourceful farmers cultivating harsh lands, by ambitious traders forging global connections, and by intrepid explorers who dared to cross an unknown ocean, not for conquest, but for what they hoped would be practical gain. The sagas speak of their courage, but the archaeological record whispers a different truth, a story of resilience, innovation, and a pragmatic spirit that understood when to push forward and when to cut their losses. The discovery of America, centuries before Columbus, was a phenomenal achievement that simply didn't fit the economic or logistical realities of its time to become a world-changing event. It's a powerful reminder that history is rarely as simple as our popular narratives suggest. The Vikings were not just terrifying invaders, they were complex people whose lives were as much about planting seeds and trading goods as they were about wielding axes. And sometimes, the greatest discoveries are those that, for a myriad of reasons, remain buried, waiting for someone to unearth the unforeseen. What do you think about the true pragmatic nature of the Viking Age? Does this change your perception of these incredible people? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed unearthing this unforeseen truth with us, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Twistra for more deep dives into history's hidden corners, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next revelation.